Evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Thursday, January 30th. We have, as a selectman, we have some short business to take care of, and then we have a discussion, and you'll see in the room members of the advisory committee that will deal with the forecast and the town debt, and I'll talk more about that at the appropriate time. We will then have some warrant articles we'd like to process, some of the early ones. And then at 7:30, we will adjourn with the advisory committee to downstairs on the second floor to hear the Community Preservation Committee's report on this year's projects. So with that, let me start the meeting with approval of the minutes for January.
I didn't get a chance to read them. I was doing the book sale all day, so.
You're not ready?
No.
All right, we'll table that for next week, Betty. Put that on for next week. We have three warrant articles, and in your warrant article book, there are Article B, which is the DCR liability, Article H, the Building Department Revolving Fund, and Article I, Elder Services Revolving Fund. Mr. Alexiadis, any comments or questions on these?
Straightforward. These are, I think, what we would consider housekeeping articles, annual recurrences.
Okay. So, do we have are they on the vote list, Betty? And
The recommended motion is in the book,
In the warrant book.
in the warrant,
in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
so what would be,
Do you want me to do the first one? And then-
Joe, why don't you do the
Okay.
first one? Thank you,
For
Irma.
DCR liability, I'll make a motion that the town, in accordance with and to the extent only permitted by general laws, Chapter 91, Section 29, as amended, assume liability for all damages that may be incurred by work to be performed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the improvement, development, maintenance, and protection of tidal and non-tidal rivers and streams, harbors, tidewaters, foreshores, and shores along a public beach within the town, in accordance with Section 11 of said Chapter 91, and that the Board of Selectmen is hereby authorized to execute and deliver a bond of indemnity to the Commonwealth assuming such liability.
Do I have a second? Second. All those, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, to Article H. Paul, would you be kind enough to do
That in
it?
accordance with the provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53E, half, which allows the town to establish departmental revolving funds, the town authorizes the continuation of such a fund in the building department. Departmental receipts for building inspections performed by the Assistant Building Inspector shall be credited to the fund. Money shall be spent primarily to compensate such inspectors for their services. The building commissioner or functional equivalent shall be authorized to spend monies from the fund. The amount that may be spent from the fund shall be limited to $250,000 during fiscal year 2015.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Is that enough? Is that enough in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Irma, would you do Article I?
The Elder Services Revolving Fund, I'll make a motion that in accordance with the provisions of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53E, 1.5, which allows the town to establish departmental revolving funds, the town authorizes the continuation of such a fund for the Department of Elder Services. Departmental receipts for all fees and charges received from senior center programs shall be credited to the fund. Money shall be spent for senior center programs and related expenses. The Director of Elder Services or functional equivalent shall be authorized to spend monies from the fund. The amount that may be spent from the fund shall be limited to $60,000 during the fiscal year 2015.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So we started the process. The next part of the agenda is an informational package that we wanted to share, and the "we" is the forecast group, which consists of the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, the chairman of the advisory, and the vice chair of the advisory, in conjunction with the town administrator. We'll start the discussion with an update of the five-year forecast. And before we get into those numbers, which hopefully everybody brought their microscopes to see, the thing I'd like to, these are iterative numbers. They're numbers still being worked through, but as of today, they are our best estimate of where we're at. The three critical numbers that are still in discussion are the new growth numbers, the state aid number, which, as you may know, is contingent on what the governor announced last week, and how the two houses will appropriate monies. So it's our best estimate at this point where that's at. And the last number that's in discussion is group insurance, which is a number that has been changing over the years, and the number you see up there is an estimate. That may change, but at least you know those are the three. The others we're fairly confident of. So with that, I'll turn the microphone over to the town administrator to walk you through the forecast. Ted?
Okay, thank you. So as Bruce mentioned, the first change from the last forecast is in the area of new growth. And I've increased that estimate from 850 to 975 based upon data that I've gotten from the assessor. And while we haven't gone through all the building permits for calendar 2014 or 2013 that will drive the valuation, and valuation for fiscal 15 starts as of whatever's in the ground 1/1/2014, this past January 1st. And right now, his best estimate is the 975 number. There possibly could be one more revision to this before we get to town meeting, depending on how many of the permits he can go through and if he can identify anything larger than what he thinks. The next item is debt exclusions. Debt exclusions have been lowered by $500,000 in this forecast. An initiative to decrease taxes. Debt exclusions are considered revenue sources to us for the purpose of the forecast to fund all previous voted debt exclusions. The total this year was slated to be $5,755,700. This version of the forecast uses $500,000 of operating revenue to lower that number and provide approximately a 1% reduction in property taxes. And I'll get more into that in a couple of seconds. I have a whole series of slides just on that particular part. The next change is in the area of state aid, and in this area I've increased Chapter 70, school aid, by $250,000 to reflect what we anticipate we think we will be receiving from the state this year. Also, in local receipts, just right underneath that, we've increased motor vehicle by $200,000. We're seeing growth numbers that are increasing at 7 to 8% per year for the last 2-year cycle now, which is consistent with our knowledge of the automotive industry's success in the last year and a half in terms of car sales. So right now we're expecting collections to exceed $3.6 million for fiscal 2015, and we've reflected that in the forecast. There's been a slight adjustment to Article 4 and 5 to reflect what we think are more accurately the contract settlements. And Sue, what was the adjustment here on this? $40,000. There was a $40,000 increase, and this will cover all town union settlements, projected union settlements. And those are the only changes to the forecast from the last time that you've seen this. I want to remind everybody that the appropriations side of this forecast includes the operating budget recommendations for all departments other than the school department, as I've presented to the Board of Selectmen. So for those who've, in their own mind, added things or subtracted things, I'll give you a starting point, which is my recommendations. I'll update it after the Selectmen vote their recommendations, and then, of course, for advisory when you guys take your turn. And I think, Oh, and the schools, just to make sure we keep our minds set on, right now, the forecast, and again, it's just our preliminary forecast, it's where all the town departments started too. It's a 2% increase over the previous fiscal year, and that's reflected within the 2015 fiscal budget. Again, I want to reiterate that that is not meant to be what the school budget will be, but it's the starting point when we begin all our budgets. So our bottom line shows $292,578 surplus at this point in time in our schedule, which I think would be probably the best fiscal year that I've seen ever since I've been here, a couple decades. If I could just go back then to the next slide, which would be the middle school. I've titled it the middle school debt, and I'm going to take you through what we think is some of the reductions that we're going to be making to mitigate the impact of this new debt issue that will be hitting the tax rolls in 2015. I think it's the next key over, Betty. So look at the bottom and the start.
That's why you always bring paper handouts.
Does everybody have a hard copy? I'm sorry for the audience at home. It looks like we're not going to be able to use our AV equipment tonight.
This.
Do we have a hard copy? Okay.
All right, we've got,
So we'll have to just work with that for now.
here comes, let's see if,
Task manager.
Thank you. All right, Mike.
I want you to know that in addition to being a good budget guy, Michael knows which buttons to push. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Apologize for that delay. All right, so if we could start. The first, should make let's go full screen, Betty.
This would be a good time for a commercial break.
Do you want to do, while he's doing that, do you want to do one of the ones?
Actually, if we could just get back to the partial screen, that'd be fine, because we don't have a lot of time. Let's just stay, this will work. All right, so the second page, and I use the middle school debt because this is the debt issue that we're planning to take to market this spring, early summer. Currently, the middle school debt is forecast to increase as we make our full principal and interest payment starting in fiscal 15. And it'll accelerate from somewhat below $500,000 to about $2.7 million. And you can see it depicted on the graph accordingly. The next page shows the effect of the annual allotment of our meals tax revenue of $600,000, which has been part of our plan to reduce that debt and the cost to the taxpayers of that project. And you could see a rather substantial decrease as you see the $600,000 very evenly and nicely lowering that number as depicted by the second lower line. The next graph shows the middle school debt lowered further for the residual collections that we've reserved for this purpose for the last several years of our meals tax collection. We have approximately $2 million in the bank, and what we've done is allocated it evenly across a number of fiscal years so that our debt line would drop but never go back up for this particular issue, so that we see some stability to the tax rate. And that's depicted by the third line, bringing the cost further down to approximately $1.7 million. Effectively, it's almost a $1 million savings for the first essentially 10 years of the 20-year debt issue. The last page shows the initiative that we have on the forecast that's an additional $500,000 from general current revenue. Essentially, what this would mean would be the town would not be raising to the full extent of its legally allowable limit, tax levy limit, and creating unused levy capacity of $500,000 per year throughout the forecast period. And so you could see this dropping the debt even further to about $1.2 million. And then what I did on the third page, and let me rephrase, sorry, what I did. What Sue Nickerson did, as she's the author of all these reports for us, what Sue did is showed our total debt service, so you can get a picture not of just the middle school issue, but what we have in total out there from previous issues, both within our tax levy and items that are excluded. As you know, most of our debt is excluded from the constraints of Proposition 2.5. Then you can see depicted here the same four lines that you saw on the previous page, and typical with most of our debt financing, when a big project comes when a big project comes along, our debt peaks, and then it begins to slowly settle itself back down. Usually by the time we get to the 2032 point of this schedule, somewhere before that, we have another project that comes on, and if you look at our debt schedule over the last 50 or 60 years, it's just a series of peaks and valleys. You build something, you borrow the debt for it, and then you pay the debt off, and then you wind up building something again. And the last thing I'll show you is on this line is your debt policy line, and that is the straight line, roughly $7 million in 2014, and moving fairly steadily through as the debt policy is tied to total annual expenditures, which are projected to increase steadily. And so you could see right now that you're over your debt policy, but again, the policy is not a rule, but a guideline. And the credit rating agencies are very comfortable with a community that has exceeded its policy as long as it does it knowingly and has a plan to come back within its policy guidelines in the future. And this is exactly what this graph depicts. We're above it, and we'll move down rather quickly. If we follow the scenario outlined on the previous page here, we will effectively be within our policy guidelines by 2018-19.
So Ted, maybe for the folks at home, to the middle school question, this is the total, but to the middle school question, we authorized $35 million?
We authorized $35 million, and we were expecting to pay an annual payment of approximately $2.7 million on that debt service. And if we were to move forward with this initiative, in total, we would see that debt service bill drop from a high of 2.7 million to approximately 1.2, 1.25 million, so almost in half. I think you could equate the same amount to the 35 million being, almost in half.
Almost in half. So it's a combination of tax relief in the sense that we've reduced the principal, and therefore we've reduced the cost to the town, but what we've created is some capacity, and as many of you know, the number of projects that we have forthcoming, it gives us some more capacity to deal with the future. But it gets a long-term benefit out by taking the excess monies we've received this year to pay off that principal, and there's a tax benefit longer term to the folks, but it also gives us the capacity, if we need it, and decide as a town to vote for some future options. Is there anything, any other points that...
No, other than I know we're short for time, so I know many of the advisory committee members might have more questions, and I'd certainly make myself available to you collectively, individually, or in any way you would like.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
next week. That Greg and I talked, and we decided that there'll be an opportunity next week. This is your chance to hear it and more clarification. But that's the kind of the game plan as to where we're headed. And again, there are some numbers that require further definition, but this is our best picture. And it's actually literally as of today. So we thought we'd get it out there so that everyone would know.
It might be worthwhile noting when the next points of data will come in to
Sure.
drive some of the corrections. So some significant pieces of data that we're waiting on are obviously the state budget. We'll know more about that probably through the middle towards end of February. And of course the school budget. And those are the two largest issues. I should have a better handle on where we are going to be with healthcare within the next 2 weeks too.
Okay, so before we adjourn, we have just some two articles of business to take care of. So I'll ask, one is on a one-day liquor license. If I could ask you, Mr. Healy, if you'd be so kind.
Sure. I move that we approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverage liquor license to Jerry Smith on behalf of the Choral Art Society of the South Shore for the Cabaret Au Chocolat fundraiser to be held at St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church on Saturday, March 8, 2014, from 7 p.m. to 9:30 p.m.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, Irma?
Make a motion to approve the issuance of an annual dealer in and keeper of a shop for the purchase, sale, or barter of second-hand metals and/or old or second-hand precious metals licensed to Norman W. McCullough, doing business as Antiques of Hingham.
Second.
Any further discussion?
A question, does Mike have any issues with this? Moreno?
And he's not made me aware of any.
Okay,
Okay.
thought I'd ask.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're going to take a temporary break to go downstairs to begin to hear the Community Preservation Commission's proposals. We should be back online in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you fill me in too on the Board of Health thing? I got a wind of it as I left.
I'd like to, we're reconvening the Hingham Board of Selectmen with the Town Advisory Committee. I think it's appropriate that since not everyone hasn't had an opportunity to know all the people who engage in these discussions. To my left is Paul Healy, and to my right is Irma Louder. I'm Bruce Rebuffo. I'd like to give Greg McCune, the chair of the advisory committee. Would you like to introduce your members? If you
Sure. I can remember who they all are.
Sorry, Greg.
Immediately to my right is Mary Power, the vice chair of the advisory committee. Next to her is Dan Dwyer. And then the row immediately behind us, we've got Mike Barkley, Don Smallwood, Jim Sherkansky, Craig McKay, Lucy Hancock, Ted Joyce, and then Sue Nickerson, who is the town accountant.
Okay, very good. The way we're going to do this evening is there are a number of projects that you've read about in the paper. We'll hear the merits of each case and some background. We will start with the chairman of the Community Preservation Commission, Bob Curley. Bob will give some background to the folks at home who aren't maybe readily familiar with the Community Preservation Act. And then we'll take each project, and after each project, we'll have an opportunity to have questions. It's important to remember, this is not a hearing. This is the first blush at information. There will be subsequent public hearings on these matters that will afford people, both here and at home, an opportunity to further pursue questions. Mr. Curley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob Curley, 1 Gristmill Lane, Chair of the CPC. I'd like to thank the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee for this opportunity to discuss our recommendations concerning CPA articles this year. I'd also would like to acknowledge the members of the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee, who are here, Selectman Lauder, our Vice Chair, Matt Seiper, Kathleen Peters, Vicki Donlin, Jim Watson, and Gary Tonduff Dick, and Sally Weston. We put a lot of hours in vetting a lot of projects this year. Just by way of background, the Community Preservation Act was adopted by the state legislature in the year 2000. Hingham was one of the early communities adopting it and adopted it in 2003. The Community Preservation Act is a mechanism to provide funds for classically historic preservation, community housing, open space, and recreation. And within the last 2 years, it was amended to expand the recreational use opportunities. Through the end of 2012, Hingham had made recommendations of $11,924,382 for community preservation projects. Of that money, roughly $4.4 million was from state matching funds and $6.8 from funds raised locally, primarily through the 1.5% surcharge on real estate taxes. The breakdown, again in rough numbers, of the way Community Preservation Act funds have been spent over the last 10 years. There's been roughly $1.2 million spent for community housing, $2.3 million spent for historic preservation, and $8 million for open space and recreation. This year, we had 24 proposals for Community Preservation Act funds, and we've made 15 recommendations for funding of those 24 proposals. Basically, our process involved accepting applications in accordance with our application procedures, the selection and appointment of project managers. A committee member was appointed to each project to work with the project proponent to assure completeness of the items that we needed to properly vet the projects. We conducted site visits of all projects that involved the site. We had 2 public meetings at which proponents could present their proposals and project managers could comment and the public could provide input. And that's for each project, and because there were so many projects, we had to divide the meetings into 2 nights on each occasion, so we ended up having 4 meetings. Then the committee deliberated and made its recommendations. I think you've all been provided with a worksheet, and I'll comment briefly on the numbers at the top. The total CPA funds available this year were almost $1.6 million, $1,598,218. We were very fortunate that the state legislature included an extra $25 million in the budget for CPA funds this year. And our state matching funds actually almost doubled this year from what they were last year. We got a state match of $434,996. So between the state match and revenues generated locally, we had roughly $1.3 million, and we had already had roughly $300,000 in a community housing reserve. So those are the total funds that were available for CPA projects this year. Now, I will go down the worksheet in the order presented. I'll try to briefly provide a description of the project. Some of the proponents are here, and if there are questions that need amplification, it might be appropriate for them to address those questions in addition to myself or one of our CPC project managers. So the first project is the Girl Scout House. The Girl Scout House is one of the neighbors of the town hall over here on Burr Road. It is a very historic building. It is one of the oldest Girl Scout houses in the country. It has provided service to the community for many, many years in many, many different ways. The National Girl Scout organization has essentially withdrawn from funding local operations, and the building is in need of stabilization. Through fundraising efforts of the board of the Girl Scouts, they went ahead and took care of the roof and are proceeding to make the building watertight. The stabilization project involves largely, again, preserving the exterior shell, gutters, basement door. There are water penetration issues, and the amount recommended by the CPC was $98,049, which will cover that stabilization phase. So, Mr. Chairman,
Okay, any questions from Mr. Healy?
Not at this time.
Mr. McCune, any questions from the advisory? Oh, done.
Okay. The Ames Chapel Preservation Project is a project that is not new to either the AdCom or the Board of Selectmen. It has been ongoing and discussed for the last several years. The CPC has recommended $30,000, which we had basically been asked for last year but didn't have sufficient funds to provide it. The Ames Chapel is located in the Hingham Cemetery. It is a very lovely, historic chapel on a very historic piece of property. Significant work has already been done, including some restoration and installation of some beautiful stained glass. The project is going to end up with a community meeting place that will basically be open for town purposes, public purposes, and it's a well-deserving historic preservation project.
Just a question, is this will this complete their request from the number of years they've been active?
This will complete the project. This is roughly, this will mean that CPA funds will roughly have funded about 1/3 of the project, with the other 2/3 coming from fundraising efforts of the cemetery board and from their endowment.
Okay, thank you. Irma?
Just one comment. If anyone has not gone up to Ames Chapel and looked at the stained glass window, and frankly, I hadn't in all the times that I've been around or just taken a walk through the cemetery, that stained glass window is absolutely magnificent, and now you can actually see it. So do take a walk up there.
Okay. Mr. Healy? No?
Nothing.
All right, Mr. McCune? Okay. Okay.
Right. The next item, again, is something that is not new to this review process. The Hingham Historical Collections Master Plan has been going on for a number of years now. Eileen McCracken is the proponent. We're basically talking about town historical documents. I'm going to forget the name for the person, the curator, the
Archivist.
the archivist, thank you, was before us, and she was actually raving about the wealth of historic documentation that is present in Hingham and that is being cataloged, indexed, and preserved so that it will be publicly available and preserved for a long time. These are resources that many towns have lost because they haven't taken the kind of care that Hingham has to preserve the documents.
I'm familiar with this one. Any questions? No?
I'm good.
None from advisory. Okay.
The Old Colony Masons Lodge is on the historic inventory. It is a historic building that goes back to the 1920s, if I'm remembering correctly. When it was originally constructed, it had a slate roof on it. When that original slate roof failed, due to lack of funds to replace it, an asphalt roof was put on. That asphalt roof is now failing, and the Masons, the Building Association, has applied for CPA funds. The original request was for $300,000. Through some careful look at the engineering, the cost of the project has gone down to $227,000, of which the Building Association is asking for $150,000 of CPA funds. And the funds were basically being used to restore the historic appearance of the lodge, to put a black slate roof on the lodge that will essentially duplicate the way it looked when it was originally constructed. And this slate roof is projected to last for another 80 years. And we've basically been told that this is a one-time request by the Building Association to the CPA for this kind of funding. The Masons do they're incredibly open to having their building used by any number of public groups. They do blood drives. They make their building available without charge to any number of youth groups. They're a very civic-minded organization. I think indeed many of us on the committee thought that any dollar we didn't recommend was a dollar that wasn't going to a burned child at the Shriners Burn Center. So I think those are my comments at this point.
I'm good.
Are they putting any of their own money in? How
Well,
much?
they're doing fundraising to the extent of, I guess it's $77,000.
77 is there. Okay.
They have received some Greenbush Trust Fund money, and they're going to bridge the gap with respect to the rest of it.
Okay, thank you.
Just one question, is your commitment contingent upon them raising that money?
I think we would put in the grant agreement that we would have with anybody that ultimately gets CPC money. Number one, that they'd have to put a historic preservation restriction on the building, and that they would need to have all money available for the project before we would make our CPA funds available. Second Parish handicap access. The Second Parish Church is on Main Street. Again, it's a wonderful organization. It's really the home of many of the food pantry activities. And it is not presently handicapped accessible to the extent that handicapped people have had to get in. They've had to be physically carried up the steps. We originally looked at the proposal they had and didn't think that it was the best way to go about it. so that the proposal actually has been revamped from an actual construction proposal to a design proposal. As you face the church from Main Street, originally the proposal was to put an entryway in on the north side, which is the farthest area away from the parking lot. And the current proposal is to put an entryway in from the south side that is going to be much more functional, and the Second Parish people, I'm sure, are looking forward to coming back to the CPC next year, but they have indicated that they will be doing fundraising on their own to significantly support the construction phase of the project. So the $10,000 that's been recommended is really for design work.
No questions here? Okay, Bob?
Okay. I will just indicate that with respect to the Heritage Museum, we do anticipate the first round of bonding this year, and so we're setting aside $146,000 to cover the initial cost of the bonds. That is a cost that will go down each year until the bonds are finally paid off. So the next recommendation is for the CPC Administrative Fund. We originally recommended $50,000, and we had to cut that back to make the numbers budget to a balance to $49,421. The CPC Administrative Fund is used to pay the salary of Carol Costello, our administrative support person, who I can't compliment enough. She does an absolutely fantastic job providing service to the members of the committee and to the community. So this goes to pay part of her salary. It goes to pay part of Roger Fernandez's salary, who as a town engineer provides support to the CPC with respect to many of the projects in which we need engineering guidance. Roger has been instrumental in actually bringing projects in for less than the amount of recommendations and actually returning funds into the General Reserve Fund. The CPC Administrative Fund is also used for things such as land appraisals or legal costs as necessary. We've kind of let the fund get low in past years to allow other projects to have funding, and we felt at this time that it was time to have a little cushion in the administrative fund. It's also used to pay our coalition dues to the CPA coalition.
Okay, Greg? Okay.
The Conservation Fund is used by the Conservation Committee for things like land appraisals, due diligence on land purchases, and environmental studies on land purchases, that sort of thing. And the Conservation Fund has been a very useful and flexible way to have available funds, especially with respect to open space purchases. And similarly, we had to cut that back a little to make the numbers make the numbers balance. Depending on other contingencies that I'll get to, we recommend restoring the full amount of $45,000.
Okay. Let me just raise that question. If in fact some other project were to fall out, would these projects then go back to the originally proposed amount?
Yes, that would be our understanding.
That would be what you would do?
Yep.
Okay. No? Okay.
The Comprehensive Trails Plans Program, as the proponent is the Conservation Commission, and basically at this time, we have a wonderful amount of open space in the town of Hingham, and this is basically a design study proposal to look at ways to best utilize that open space. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the 173 Whiting Street item, because I think it's a good example of where trail planning and open space use planning will be a welcome addition to the town.
No, okay.
Okay. The Boy Scouts land proposal is something that the CPC looked at last year and wanted to do. It's about 6 acres of land. It's in the Liberty Pole area. It abuts existing conservation property. The Eel River runs through part of the property, and there is a cold water stream there as well that has some fish, wildlife that is not present in copious numbers elsewhere in the town. It's a tremendous piece of open space that complements land that the town already has, and the purchase price is exceptionally reasonable. It's supported by an appraisal. The purchase price is essentially $30,000, and the extra $14,500 is for environmental review, appraisals, legal cost, and conservation restriction monitoring that we need to put in place whenever we have an open space purchase.
Are there any structures on this property presently?
There are no structures on the property.
But there are brambles big enough to be a structure.
I guess I'm just
We
curious as
walked
to
it.
whether there's anything subsurface that might come as a nasty surprise later.
No, my memory of the history of the property is that I think it was back in the 1920s or so that the land was given to the Boy Scouts for use as a campground. And it was used for a number of years by the Boy Scouts. So I suppose there might be subsurface artifacts of scouting activities, but I don't think we're going to find old oil drums there.
No. Nothing labeled PH on it, right? No,
Right.
Okay.
But Concom will be doing its due diligence in that regard so that there won't be surprises.
Could you just be a little more specific on the location? You said adjacent to the...
There's, I believe it's where Colonial Road meets Pilgrim Road. And if you, Pilgrim Road dead ends, and where it dead ends, that's town conservation property. This parcel is, as you're looking at the dead end, is off to the right of that existing town conservation property. There's other access to it as well, if, for those who are familiar with where the Eel River runs under Colonial Road, it runs alongside a house on Colonial, and there's an easement into the property along the river.
Any other question? Okay. Okay. Bob?
Okay, Whitney Wharf is, again, a project that goes back quite a ways in terms of CPC involvement, in terms of the original construction of the park. This is construction cost for the completion of the bridge from behind Red Eye Roasters over onto Whitney Wharf. And it is basically needed because construction costs have gone up in the last couple of years since the project was originally approved.
When was the project approved?
I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and how much does this represent as an increase?
Maybe 20%. Was it 180,000 that was approved? 280? Okay.
And
So
270
15%.
was approved, and it's now
40 more.
40 more. It's about a 15% construction increase?
It was
In
275 in 2012.
And it's engineering fees, as I understand it, materials for the bridge.
And I know Roger and Alan Peralta have looked at this, and they have assured us that this is needed.
Okay. Paul?
Nothing.
Okay, any questions? Okay.
173 Whiting Street. If you think about the Dunkin' Donuts at the corner of Gardner Street, then there's a commercial building next to that. 173 Whiting Street is to the right of that building. This proposal originally came to the CPC as historical preservation, affordable housing, and open space project with an ask of $599,000. There is a beautiful historic home on the property, and the total property is about 6 acres. The backland already has some existing trails on it. The back 4 acres abuts existing conservation land on Gardner Street, and it goes over almost to school property, Cord Brook property. And this provides pretty substantial land bridge between that Gardner Street conservation property and the other conservation property, so that ultimately, once we have the trails planned, it might be possible to walk from Main Street all the way to Dunkin' Donuts, get your coffee, and go back again. And there was some creative negotiation by the Concom with the owners as this proposal was developing, whereby they are now willing to sell the back 4 acres to the town for a price in a range of $155,000 to $175,000 to be supported by an appraisal. The Conservation Commission has voted in favor of this proposal and has voted in favor of an accelerated appraisal, which is in process now. We would expect to have it within the next couple of weeks. So this is one of those projects that presents a contingency. If the appraisal doesn't come in at a price in that range, and if further negotiations aren't able to result in a deal with the owners, this money would drop out of the picture. We would have in mind, and I'll come to this when we get to the bond, adding this amount of money to the bond proposal in the event that isn't available to obtain 173 Whiting Street.
Question?
I'm not clear. Are you saying that the acquisition of this land will allow one to walk from Whiting Street to the back of the middle school and remain on public land?
As I understand it from Conservation, it would allow you to go from Gardner Street
Okay.
to, across the existing conservation parcel, across this 4 acres. There might need to be a small easement over the back of somebody else's property or one other connecting parcel before you get to other town-owned open space.
And how big would that parcel be?
The other parcel, the easement, I don't have a good number on that, Paul.
So it sounds like there's some things that have to happen before this is ready for prime time,
Well, we need the appraisal,
and you'll have that in a couple of weeks?
and we'll have that in a couple of weeks. The price seemed to be within the ballpark of reason to the CPC in terms of other open space areas. This is in an area where there are probably a number of different development options depending on who obtained the property and what they might want to do with it.
It also adds to the conservation space in an open space in South Hingham, and we don't have very much there.
And ultimately, that green belt, is almost going across Main Street into the Scotland Road area, into the town forest, Wampatuck State Park. It's an important link, I think, in a significant green belt area that would go through the town.
Just a quick question to Joyce. You mentioned it's 6 acres, and then you mentioned 4 acres on top of that. Is that an adjacent property that's the 4 acres, or?
No, the total property was 6 acres. The owners would be keeping the residence plus 2 acres. Then the back property, which goes behind this property, this home on Whiting Street, and also behind other properties on Whiting Street, is what they'd be selling to the town.
Paul has a follow-up?
Bob, just a quick question. Did you look at a Conservation Commission map to determine just what the extent of the wetlands on this property was, or is?
The answer is yes.
What percentage of it is wet?
I can't tell you off the top of my head what percentage is wet. From walking it, it seemed to be mostly upland.
Would you like more information?
Jim Sharkey is, this 4 acres, is there access to this acres? Is it developable aside from the easement through the town property, or is there potential for someone to buy this land and develop it?
Yeah.
Well, if someone bought the total 6 acres, there is substantial frontage along Whiting Street, and, I mean, we all know what the potential development options are depending on who gets it. So, yes, there is potential development there. The bathing beach stabilization, if you think about where the turn is on Route 3A, that end of the beach, down past the bathhouse, there has been substantial erosion there due to storm activity. There had been work done in that area of the beach with what I'll call small riprap, and this proposal is essentially going to put in much larger riprap to make sure that erosion doesn't occur, and it's more substantial and is raising the elevation. It was part of an original almost $600,000 proposal to do beach stabilization in that area. This is the most pressing part of it, and there are good plans prepared, ready to go forward.
No, I think we all know about that. That's for sure. No? Greg? Okay.
Okay. The barn, which has also been referred to in the past as the head house, is the building out behind Town Hall. That is the last remains of the Hingham Cordage Company. And CPA funds have been used to preserve the historic exterior of the barn. The present proposal was vetted throughout the year as a recreation project to primarily establish handicapped accessible bathroom facilities in the Cronin Field area. Right now, there aren't any, other than to the limited extent that when the town hall is open, that people can use the town hall bathrooms. The proposal also establishes indoor recreation space that would be heated and could be used throughout the year for a host of recreational activities. This proposal came to us in two phases. And I know that the Recreation Commission was also looking for funds from capital outlay, and I don't know exactly where that stands, but to really make the barn usable, this work preferably should be done in one stage, and preferably would cost maybe $25,000 less if it could be done in one stage. And it is for that reason that we felt that if the Whiting Street property fell through, that we would recommend adding that $207,500 to the bond project, which would put the Recreation Commission in a position where very substantial work could be done, and the project could be substantially complete and open to the public with heated facilities and bathrooms.
So I'm just curious, your 382.5 versus 400, what are you referring to in the comment?
The 400 was, I think, the original proposed amount, but because the numbers don't add up, all we can get to is the 382.5.
The other question would be, if you did fully fund the barn by taking the 207.5, what would you do about fully funding the administrative fund and the conservation fund?
We'd leave them alone.
Okay, so,
We leave them at the lower numbers.
so what would be the options at this point of fully funding those two if Whiting Street goes ahead? If you really
We've looked at our expenses at the CPC. Last year, our expenses were $30,000. So we feel even at a reduced amount, we've got a cushion, and Conservation has indicated likewise. So we would just leave the administrative funds at the lower amounts, and we would recommend adding the $207,500 to the barn project, which might get it almost all done except the parking.
And the CPC, and the COC part, which actually has to be agreed upon, the capital.
Right.
But if the 25,000 is the savings, it might mean the capital kicks in less or you kick in less, depending on how they work it out.
Well, I think they still need some capital outlay funds, but,
Maybe 200,000, say,
right.
for capital. Thank you.
okay.
I have a question. Were you presented with an analysis of just exactly what could be done in there? I mean, how much square footage is inside on a build-out, and how much parking would you need? And
Mark probably could provide more detailed information than I, but it's a pretty good-sized interior space. You certainly have room for substantial group activities, yoga, exercise of all sorts, summer programs for the children that go to Cronin Field. It's not a small or cramped space.
what's in there now?
Basically, it's been used for storage over the years.
Nothing.
It's not presently heated. I mean, it was, there were structural problems with it that had to be addressed, which were addressed through the CPC several years ago.
How much money has been spent on it to date?
The other two things it provides is during the very, very hot weather, it's a place where the kids at the summer programs could retreat to. And also in inclement weather during the summer programs. That would be a place where the kids enjoying the recreation activities could retreat to.
What's the capacity, do you know?
I don't off the top of my head, but maybe Mark does. But it is a huge building inside.
It's 2,000 square feet each floor. We'd just be using the first floor for programs. And I talked to the building commissioner, the capacity depends on the type of programming that you have in there. But based off of 2,000 square feet, if you wanted to have a program with over 100 kids or adults in it, you could. So it's pretty substantial size.
To answer your question, Paul, there was a cottage factory feasibility study voted in 2011 for $25,000, and there was a cottage factory rehabilitation voted in 2012 for $252,000.
And do you think you have the parking there, from a planning perspective,
Do we think we have
for
parking
the
there?
anticipated build-out?
I understand that the plans include parking ultimately. There's existing parking there now,
It's not extensive, though.
but it's not extensive, no. This is also very close to what is probably the most used children's playground in the town.
Plus Cronin Field.
And the skating rink and the basketball courts, and, I mean, it's really quite a recreational complex without a field house type of bathroom facilities.
Michael's got a question.
Yeah, Mike Barclay. I seem to remember a proposal of the rec commission being relocated potentially. Is this mutually exclusive from that? If the rec commission was to, if that
No,
was
it's
to
both.
work out, would, you know, what would the purpose of this be? Is it that it can be a different spot for the programs? So even if that relocation occurs, this will still be, you know, used in the, you know, to the maximum fashion?
Sure, so our vision for the future is, we know that they're taking a look at, the town's taking a look at building 179 for at Carlson Fields. We kind of envision everything fitness related that we do would take place over there, and that with Town Hall still having the indoor basketball gym, Sanborn Auditorium, and hopefully the barn project, it would still allow the indoor space for all our summer programs, and plus everything else we do for enrichment programs during the year.
And does this presuppose that Cronin Field will have to be there for the entire time? That nothing would happen to Cronin Field?
I'm not sure the question.
Well, I haven't seen this anywhere
I know what you
specifically,
mean.
but my understanding is there's a proposal potentially to pave over Cronin Field,
There is a discussion.
or a discussion.
It's a discussion. Is that an option to cure some of the parking problems that we have here at Town Hall, considering our intrusion on the neighbors? But it's just what Michael says, it's a discussion.
Michael, even if, presuming something would happen to Cronin, which I'm not sure I can see happening, you'd still have your playgrounds and your fields. And if the bulk of the rec moves over to Building 179, they still need a presence in the town hall area. And the barn would give them that, plus bathrooms, which, as everybody knows, we don't have.
And my understanding, Mark, is that that the summer program would continue even if you did relocate at the town hall. That's okay. Paul?
Has the Recreation Commission committed to that goal, if in fact this is funded? To have a perpetual summer presence here for the children?
Just with regards to, you know, if you have to build out with the parking spaces, and I think there's 2,000 square feet for 400 people.
There's a basement and a second floor, but this proposal is just renovating the first floor. Just too cost prohibitive to add in an elevator and have programs out on the second floor. You could, but it's just too cost prohibitive. So this 576 number is just for the first floor renovation.
Okay. I guess my question just pertains to, you know, Mr. Healy had brought up the question with regard to the parking issue, and I'm just wondering about, obviously, the risk to the housing around that, folks that live around the area. With the additional activities there, would we see any kind of significant impact on cars coming in and out, you know, that type of activity, stuff like that? That would
Well, I think
kind of a downward pressure there.
the entrance to the area where you park is basically by the fire station. It's not off of Burr Road. The tennis courts are in between, so there's probably not going to be any substantial neighborhood intrusion.
Dan?
This is the first I've heard mention of the potential or possibility of paving over Cronin, so I apologize, I'm sort of thinking out loud here. But does an increase in use at the barn for all of these rec department activities make it more likely then that Cronin would need to be paved over? Because if there's some
No.
idea that Cronin would help with some current parking needs, and then it gets more active, then it's just more likely you're going into the parking lot. And I'll tell you what my sort of personal slant on this is, that I use Cronin a lot for teams I've coached, and I like it. And it's just a nice location there among all the trees and so forth, and near other things. And the parking is not great there, but between the Cronin lot and the Haley Field lot, we manage.
Yeah.
And it's not going to get busier with ball
No.
games, because it's already as busy as it can be.
No, the reason I think Mike was right to raise the question, it has been discussed, but nothing's been decided in terms of what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And if everything stayed the way it was here, we have a problem, because we made a commitment a number of years ago that we wouldn't intrude on our neighbors. And we are, tonight, as an example, intruding on our neighbors. So is there a way to solve the problem for, it's not just Elder Services that is looking, the police department are looking, and that is all stuff in motion. Vicki is shaking her head. Our game plan is not to do that if we can find another solution.
Yeah, I understand that you're not committed, but I'm just trying to think about how any further development there just exacerbates
Right,
the problem, then
right.
pushing you toward a decision that you haven't made yet. So,
Dan, if you think about additional parking or the parking around the building itself, which nobody uses, except the playground people, for the most part, unless there's a game at Cronin.
practices all the time.
Yep.
Go ahead.
But then at Haley Field, there's an area that is kind of gravelly, it's ugly. That could be turned into parking. And that would, we're looking at that, and Roger Fernandez drew up several proposals for there, so
Okay, thank you. I don't want to get too far down the road with paving.
and Cronin is absolutely the best field we have. And there's really nowhere else to build another Cronin.
Now, good question, though. That's the flag is up, okay?
Okay, so we go on to the Selectmen's parcel. If folks think about going up the driveway to the Public Works building, there's a road down to the right, and that goes down to the Selectmen's parcel that was designated and acquired by the town to be used for community housing. The Hingham Affordable Housing Trust has come to us with a proposal for $175,000 to basically put together design plans for the development of this parcel that can then be put out to bid, so that up to 40 units of affordable housing can be located in that area. Housing has been an area where the CPC has been looking for projects to do over the last few years. It's been hard to identify them. This seems to be an appropriate one, and we have provided a lot of input to the Affordable Housing Trust about trying not to clear-cut things and trying to do this in a way that is sensitive to the community needs of the town of Hingham. But that's what this proposal is fundamentally about.
Question? Okay.
Jim Sharp, is the Housing Trust using any of their funds as well towards this design cost?
I don't know that the housing...
Yes.
They are?
I don't remember how much, but
Okay.
yes. This is only for a piece of it.
All right.
The cost of cleaning right now is match or put up to the 175,000?
I believe so, Jim. They've hired a consultant to put together the RFP and do the engineering work.
And the opportunity funding is, again, a proposal that the Affordable Housing Trust brought to us for $175,000. And what this is designed to do is to give the trust the opportunity to purchase, by making a down payment and getting a mortgage, properties that come on the market in Hingham that are suitable for use for affordable housing, so that they would have a funding mechanism to take advantage of opportunities as they presented themselves to acquire affordable housing for the town.
Questions? No? Okay.
And I think that's it.
Very good.
So,
And Mary?
Thank you very much. This is very helpful. I just had a question. You have some, on your spreadsheet, you have some reserve amounts listed, and I just wondered if town meeting were to approve all these projects, how many CPC dollars would remain sort of in your bank account if all these projects were to be approved?
well, there is a $424,000 housing reserve.
And that has to
And
be used for housing,
that
as my...
has to be used for housing, and we're only spending $350,000 on housing, so the balance of almost $75,000 would remain in the housing reserve.
And then I see a reference to 126,713. Would those be reserves that would be available for future projects?
No. The 126,713 for the historic reserve and the open space reserve, that is 10% of this year's gross receipts. So that is what we're required to set aside for that specific spending. But because we would have historic and open space recreation expenditures in excess of those amounts, there would be nothing left in those reserves.
And maybe just a question, because I know with CPC, you sort of are in a nice situation where you can carry money over from year to year, where in our operating budget, any unexpended funds go to our general fund. I'm just curious as to the committee's conversation about the requests here, which would suggest that next year, if a large opportunity came along, the town would have to rely on collections from the next fiscal year. And I'm just kind of curious as to how you looked at projects to approve for this year, recognizing that those funds might not be available for other projects in the future.
Well, we have asked Historical, the Conservation Commission, Open Space, and Housing and Recreation, all to kind of give us a 5-year plan of what they are seeing coming down the road. Now, probably the least predictable of those areas is open space, because you just never know through what opportunity a desirable parcel of open space is going to become available. There's been a lot of creative thinking on the CPC about dealing with open space. The Noonan property last year, for example, is a good example where there were 3 parcels. One was just not addressed at all. One we got a conservation restriction on, and the other one we bought. And so for maybe a third or 40% of the original cost, we accomplished basically everything that we wanted to accomplish. The committee has talked in our meetings about not spending money to keep some money on hand in the event that opportunities come up. And I think we discussed that particularly this year with respect to if 173 Whiting Street didn't come through, would we just keep that money on hand? But in looking at the barn project and seeing that that was going to be coming down the road the next year again in any event, and that we might actually save money by moving forward in one phase in 1 year, we thought it was better to make the contingent plan of putting that money towards the barn. So we've kept our eye on the future. You're welcome.
Okay. Any other comments, Paul?
Yeah, Bob, I noticed that included in your material is the little article on CPA funding private projects. I mean, to what extent did that dominate the conversation during this process?
Well, actually, there has been substantial funding over the years by the CPC of particularly historic preservation projects of private, non-public organizations. This is something that has been well recognized throughout the Commonwealth, and it's something that people raise questions about, and so we thought it would be beneficial to include the article from the CPA Coalition just as a point of information. And I will observe that most of the significant historical resources in the town of Hingham are in private hands. So that whether it's a nonprofit organization or a private owner, that's where the historical resources are. There has only been one project funded for a purely private owner, and that was simply the purchase of a historic preservation restriction for a relatively small amount of money. All the other projects have involved nonprofit organizations that are typically, you might almost regard them as quasi-public bodies. Cemetery corporations, the Historical Society, the Old Ship Church. I mean, they're as much a part of Hingham as this town hall is, if not more so. So.
But it's also true that in many of those private cases, the private organization has stepped up to put additional funds, in most cases, a majority of the funds, to get their activity.
That is correct, and that is something we have stressed in our meetings throughout the year, that we are looking to leverage private commitments with CPA dollars. We are typically looking at the resources available to each private proponent. We're examining their financials because these are public monies, and we want to see them spent in the best way we can see them expended.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay.
I've got just a, when you're done with the question.
Before we close, and Irma, I'd like to thank the committee for this work, having sat on it for a number of years. It's not easy choices when you come in with 24 and you have to come out with something less than that. That means that some people are disappointed, and it's in many cases a difficult choice. So I want to thank the committee for the work that it does to bring this forward. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more discussion about this, certainly with us, and then again with advisory. I think getting resolution, as you mentioned in a couple of cases, that would be helpful. The sooner we can get that. We have some time before we'll schedule those hearings, but we certainly appreciate the work that you've done.
There's one other thing I meant to mention. It's just that there is a legal issue with respect to the bond project, and that has been referred to town council, and so we're awaiting an answer on that.
Okay, all right. Okay, Irma, you had one last comment?
I do. I just want to thank everybody on the CPC committee. This is the first year that I've sat through all the meetings. I've always been involved, but not to this extent. Every one of them on the committee, and the chair especially, I think he has 2 jobs. One he gets paid for and this one, and they're both full-time. The amount of work that goes into vetting each of these proposals, and the hours and hours that go into following the trail and making sure there is money and validating all the things you heard Bob Curley talk about, is truly amazing. It is very much like advisory. It is pounding. So I can't thank them enough. I think the projects that have been proposed for this year are diverse. I think they cover the whole gamut of the town. I think they're very thoughtful. And I think they protect many of our historic resources, as Bob said, that are in private hands. And the three pieces we're looking at now, we're very lucky in this town, and this is very, very special, to have the oldest Girl Scout house and either the oldest Boy Scout house or one of the oldest in continuous use in the United States. We have both of those here. And the old Colony Lodge is an amazing piece of architecture that, frankly, a lot of the groups I'm associated with use all the time for no money. So, and the land purchases that are being looked at are just gorgeous. We walked them, and they're just absolutely gorgeous to keep as open space. So I thank the committee, just from the bottom of my heart, for all your work. It really, it's been a bit of an eye-opener to me, but a very pleasant one.
Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Hewitt?
I'd echo that, but briefly, thank you, especially to my colleagues who do double duty on committees. A lot of work.
That's sure. Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.